Not all routes are created equal. Some are among the most iconic scenery the series has ever had, some are extremely forgettable, or even worse, downright bad. Today, I want to take a trip across the wild world of Pokemon, taking note of the worst area in every single Pokemon region. And of course, we begin in Kanto. This may be the most iconic region of all, mostly due to it being the first, but Kanto definitely has its fair share of extremely forgettable areas as well. Most of the named landmarks definitely don't fit that description, so we're mostly looking at routes here. There's the completely pointless Route 2, for example, or the random patch of grass in between Saffron and Celadon City that dares to call itself Route 7. However, while the purpose of these routes is definitely questionable, what I would consider to be the true worst area in Kanto is Route 19, located right beneath Fuchsia City. This route is not just a complete nothing burger, it's also an annoying nothing burger. It's a water route, meaning every single step will be spent hoping you won't be encountering another Tentacool, which is the only Pokemon that can be found here while surfing. By fishing you can encounter some cooler Pokemon like Horsey, Krabby or Slowpoke, but these are far from unique to the area. Worst of all, this route feels like a wasted opportunity. It's the only area in Kanto that can be considered a beach, which could have made for a very unique route. But instead, the beach has nothing noteworthy on it in every game except for Yellow, and the route becomes a water route just like several paths adjacent to it. At least the other two, Route 20 and 21, can boast about housing the Seafoam Islands and a mysterious patch of grass. It seems like even Game Freak realized this route wasn't it, because they cut it in half when we returned here in Gen 2. Speaking of Gen 2, we head to Johto next, which I would say has a higher average route quality than Kanto. One outlier however is Route 46, the late game route that allows players who have just started their journey to access a small part of it. I do not for the life of me know why this route exists. It seems like it was intended as a shortcut from Blackthorn City to Newbark Town, from where you'd head to the Indigo Plateau, but at this point in the game you have access to Fly. And it's a one-way shortcut too, so it's not like you can use it to quickly find your way back either. So now this route just ends up as a place to find your first Geodude, or maybe snack an early Phanpy if you play in Crystal. It's something, I guess, but it's definitely not good enough to change my mind on Route 46, easily the worst area in Johto. Next is a true challenge. Can I explain why the water routes in between Pacific Log Town and Moss Deep City are the worst areas in Hoenn without mentioning the infamous IGN review? Let's begin by narrowing the list down, because there are a grand total of 5 water routes found here. Route 127 all the way to Route 131 are the culprits, but which is the worst one? It's definitely not Route 128, as that connects to the C4 Cavern and Evergrande City, which is notable enough to save it from being the absolute worst. Route 130 and 131 are out for similar reasons, as the first is the location of Mirage Island once every blue moon, while the latter houses Sky Pillar. So that leaves only Route 127 and Route 129 as possible candidates. Since both offer pretty much the exact same in terms of value, aesthetics become the deciding factor, and when looking through that lens, Route 127 wins by a landslide. It at least has several islands and breaks up the monotony of surfing with a few land-based areas. Route 129 on the other hand is just water and rocks. Nothing but H2O as far as the eye can see. I guess you could say it just has too much water. Up next is Sinnoh, which learned its lesson and cut back on water routes heavily. We're now also reaching the point where the games don't really have useless routes anymore. Each and every area has its own vibe and charm, and something unique to that route. But there's always a worst one, so let's discuss some options. One area I always dread visiting on my playthroughs is Mount Coronet, but that says more about my sense of direction and dislike for HMs than the quality of this iconic location. Route 212 features the terrible marsh styles, but also has the lovely Pokemon Mansion and one of the greatest musical works in human history accompanying it, so it's off the hook. And that leaves the worst area of Sinnoh, Route 217. This is a snow route, meaning you can't run or ride a bike, and every single battle is affected by hail. Considering the fact Diamond and Pearl were already incredibly slow games, this all drags down the pacing of the game immensely. And for what? A route that lacks any interesting design to speak of. It's just a snowfield. It does have the ice rock for your Eevee located on it, but that's not enough to save it from the last place. Then we come to Unova, which may just have the highest quality routes and areas of any Pokemon game to date. Generally speaking, most of the routes in this region are quite short, meaning they don't overstay their welcome as much as previous entries in this video. And so, I don't think there's a single area in these games I would consider outright bad, but of course there is always one that is the least great. And for that I settled on Unova's Route 9, right next to Opelousas City. Aesthetically, it's a bit of a boring route, being just a main road where a couple of bikers come to bother you. The main feature of this small route is Shopping Mall 9, the grand department store of the Unova region. Not only has this trope lost its wow factor a bit after 5 generations, it also always felt incredibly out of place for me. Why is there a huge shopping mall on a random route where a bunch of roughnecks hang out? Wouldn't this make way more sense in Nimbasa or Castelia City? I get the location is a reference to the real life Palisades, the biggest shopping mall in New York, but in this Pokemon setting, it doesn't feel right. Now we go from the best area quality in Pokemon with Unova to the worst, as we land in Kalos. This region has so many weird and undercooked locales, the revisit it's now finally getting was sorely needed. We're gonna skip past the pathetic excuse of a route that is Kalos Route 1 or Venaville Pathway, and the borderline insulting cave that is the Chamber of Emptiness, and go straight for an even worse offender. Because these two aforementioned areas, they're terrible, but at least they're inoffensive. They waste your time, but they're harmless. The same cannot be said for the Lumiose Badlands, or Route 113, in my opinion the worst area in Pokemon history. This area is characterized by its strong winds, which greatly reduce mobility. And as we've established in this video before, moving slowly is not fun. Making matters even worse though are the local Pokemon. The desert is crawling with overworld encounters in the form of dust mounts, meaning repels are useless against them. Only a handful of Pokemon can be found here, with Dugtrio and Trapinch being by far the most common ones. You know what they have in common? Arena Trap, the ability that prevents escaping. What sicko came up with this idea? Almost unavoidable encounters with Pokemon you can't run away from. It's awful. And as if that wasn't enough, this is also the route with the infamous Kalos power plant, which seems like it should be explorable and could have redeemed this area, but instead amounts to absolutely nothing. A mess of a location. Alola is up next, which at least improves its area quality compared to Kalos. There is not one area in this game which even comes close to the dislike I have for several locations in Kalos, but that doesn't mean Alola isn't without its flaws. From a gameplay perspective, I'd say Hyena Desert is the worst location of the region, seeing as it is an absolute nightmare to navigate in a way that feels very unnecessary. Once again, we were also greeted by Arena Trap Pokemon like Trapinch, although they're not as much of a nuisance here as they were in Kalos. This area is saved however by the cool lore of the desert, with a mysterious man appearing there after beating the game, the Celesteela that can be found here during the Ultra Beast missions, and the presence of the Runes of Abundance. And so, the true worst area in Alola is in my opinion Executor Island. The entire existence of this island feels contrived, as it was only introduced as a way to stretch out the plot a bit. Its only other reason for existing is the presence of, surprise, Alolan Executor, but considering Execute can be found on Pony Island, you could easily already have one on your team by now. Aesthetically, this place is also just not it, with a design that feels like someone just drew up the most basic design of an island he could think of. We had the Galar next, often criticized for its routes and areas. While I definitely see the flaws of the region, I personally don't think it's as bad as people like to say it is, and while the route design does tend to be very hallway-esque, the aesthetics are at least colorful, charming and easy on the eye. That said, I can't overlook the anti-climax that is Galar Route 10. Now, I am not a huge fan of Victory Road, or caves in general really, and don't mind them getting the boot. But this route is the other extreme. This area is so incredibly soulless. It feels like they left this one for late in development, and considering ice is always found at the end of the game, decided to toss that in there and call it a day. And it wasn't even necessary either. Not only can ice types be found commonly in the wild area, literally the last route before this one, Route 9, is also an icy route. And that one makes a lot more sense, being connected to Kirchester and all that. Winden deserves a way more epic route leading to it. And while I'm not saying it has to be some elaborate dungeon, what we ended up getting definitely does not deliver. We dial back the clock a few hundred years now as we visit Hisui, the first Pokemon game to ditch routes altogether. This makes picking a worse location significantly more difficult, especially because a lot of focus was put into making each area feel unique and alive. Game Freak definitely succeeded in my opinion, but again there's always a worst one, this time being Scarlet Bog in the Crimson Mirelands. Remember what I said about marsh styles and Sinnoh? Well, those weren't a whole lot better 100 years ago. While you at least don't come to a full stop this time around, the aesthetics of the bog are much worse than its modern counterpart. Its dreary colors, with a lot of brown and orange, and filled to the brim with annoying and aggressive Pokemon like Hippowdon, Alpha Skuntank and its many Stunky. But the true reason this area is the worst is revealed when you visit after beating the game, when Enamorus shows up. catching this brand new Pokemon is incredibly difficult in this area because of the complete lack of places to hide or sneak up on her and the aforementioned aggressive Pokemon constantly bothering you. I found catching Enamorus to be the most difficult part of Legends Arceus by a wide margin, and that's mostly the result of its location, the Scarlet Bog. And we go from one Scarlet to another, as we finally head to Paldea. Similarly to Hisui, this game has no routes to speak of, which does help make locales memorable and stand out more. Now, I hope you believe me when I say that if anyone is getting absolutely tired of discourse about these games' performance, it's me. We all know it sucks, we all know it needs to improve in future installments. Constantly repeating it doesn't help anyone. With that said, in my opinion there is a direct connection between the performance of this game and its worst area, being Casseroya Lake. Maybe the game is trying to render every drop of water individually, I don't know, but every time I swim or fly over this area, performance comes to a crashing halt. As if that wasn't bad enough, it also means you have to find a way to avoid the absolute monster that is Veluza while dealing with massive frame drops, and the eyesore that is the water effect in Paldea. We have come to the point where I no longer fly over the lake, but instead walk around it if I need to be somewhere nearby. Which is a shame, because a lake like this suits Pokemon's new open world philosophy very well. And with that, we have completed our tour across the Pokemon world. Let me know in the comments whether you agree or disagree with my picks, and if you enjoyed hearing me talk about Pokemon, consider liking this video and subscribing. For now, thanks for watching and enjoy the rest of your day.